Well, hello garden friends. We are having a beautiful morning to actually get out and do a few things outside. So you can see that it's overcast, it's a little hazy, but the weather's perfect. We're getting slightly cool right now with just a bit of humidity. So what I'm gonna do today is a few different tasks that I've kind of been waiting on doing. Those ones that you seem to leave at your back door if you're a gardener and then wait until the right time, which never comes, so finally you just have to do it. That's today. I've had a box of small natives I've been wanting to plant in the prairie that's out in my field. And they've kind of just been hanging out there for a couple months. And if you're a gardener, that's not that surprising because a lot of times we buy plants, we let them sit there and we keep looking at them and they seem to stare at us in the eyes every time we go outside. Yeah, that's the ones I'm taking care of today. And it's kind of a tricky spot to plant in. Since I've planted prairie and there's grass, obviously it's taken a really good start. Digging within that is kind of hard. So I have a good tool today I'm gonna use and talk all about why I'm using it out there and how it really does make a huge difference. I also have a couple other garden tasks I wanna do. I want to trim up and shape my rosemary topiary. That's something I kind of do once or twice a year, depending how much it grows. I may even see if I have time to go stake a tree. You know, sometimes new trees, when they get a little taller, they're a little top heavy. And so since it doesn't have the root ball, because it was just planted this year going into the ground, I wanna make sure I stake that for any other wind or storms we could have. So it's all those small little garden tasks that add up to a day of tasks in the garden, but it's all good things to get done. As you can see, I wanna kind of span here a little bit. We are green, even though it is midsummer. The last few years we are still in a drought now, but we have been super dry and no rain in the middle of summer. This year we've had some rain in the middle of summer and look, it greened everything up, which is really nice. It's been quite a while since it's been green in summer, which is gonna make actually everything a little bit easier today too. I'm out in my prairie now and you can see I did prep, well, not just for this planting, but I actually mowed down some of the prairie just yesterday. So anytime you establish a new area, I call it prairie. It's a grass seed mix with some native blends of grass in it. And the reason when you're starting to establish one, it can be kind of difficult because still invasive weeds can start taking hold. And so in certain areas, there were some weeds that were starting to come in. So I mowed everything down to give the grass another chance to shade out and get above the weeds that were coming. So the weeds got knocked down too. And I wanted to make sure to mow it before any of those weeds went to seed, started their flower head and then had seeds, because that's what causes them to spread even more quickly. So I left a little bit of an area where there were really no weeds, but now this is going to allow me to have an easier chance to plant in. Now, you can see down here, it's still not necessarily easy in the sense that there's lots of grass, there's lots of grass stalks. And so that wouldn't usually be as easy to plant in, but I have a great tool that's gonna help me. So let's go over how I'm gonna plant and what I'm using. So I'm gonna use a power planter today. And this is one of those great things that I don't always talk about, but it really can help pretty much anytime you plant something. There are different size augers, but if you're just gonna buy an auger, all you need at home is a drill. You attach the auger to the drill you have, it goes by the size of the auger, and then you just secure it. As you can see, I just had it started here. I didn't do any prepping or digging here, but I was able to get down into that grass layer where those roots are with this small power planter. The small bit you can use pretty much with any home drill. The larger ones I have, the augers, you have to use with much larger, heavy duty drills. And they can be a little bit more heavy and awkward to work with if you're not using them. This one is super easy. I feel like there's no learning curve with it, but also this is the size I need for all the small plants I'm gonna be using today. So we'll talk more about this, but let's talk about the plants here too. I brought them out in a big trough. So we have lots of different ones, kind of a mixture of things that can be native, and that's gonna depend where you are and what is kind of in your area. But I have some prairie dock here. And you know, I just wanna be able to start adding in some different native plants as I'm going around. I have common ironweed. You know, I have more of an ornamental ironweed in my flower bed behind my path that I planted, but then I have the more common one in here. I have some more mountain mint. So I really do have a mixture of kind of fun, unique ones and ones that are just normal. Like, you know, coneflower. I mean, you can't go wrong with certain coneflowers when they're native. And this is gonna add obviously some color overall, but obviously I wanna also give these a chance over the years to naturalize. So I thought every year I'll add in some of my own natives like this. I do have some seed that was in the grass mix that is supposed to be flowers, but it can take longer for that to take hold and get established. So doing some plants like this is just a great way to offset that. If you want to see how it works, you can see here. I have the grass that I cut down. It's very still solid underneath, so I have not displaced any soil. I have not tilled anything. We're starting from soil that has been sitting and not compacting, but really creating that crust on top. So I'm just putting my size auger I'm gonna use. I'm just gonna start slowly working it in. I like to do it a couple times first to make sure it's gonna work in okay, and just to kind of get a hold and make sure you feel comfortable and sturdy. That's the real important part here. Once I get down in there, I can then let it go a little bit quicker until I get to the size depth I want. And to rate your depth, you can go by these and start knowing how deep it is when those start going into the soil. What I like about it is it just piles the soil right around that hole, so it doesn't fling it way out. And then when I pull this up, I can just kind of knock off that excess dirt, and there's my hole ready to go. Now, do you see how nice this is? This really does work super well. Now, you're gonna say, well, it looks like you have good moisture, which right now I do. Usually I don't in the summer. But I've been trying this also a few weeks ago when it was super dry out. It works just as well. I've been putting slowly some prairie plants in here all summer long, and this has been working well through all of that. It works well in that crusty, hard soil, and it works well when it's nicer like this. What I really like is just that it doesn't make a huge mess and make me have to make a bigger mess. So I can now pop this plant. Since I chose a size auger that was just for the size plant, you can see how perfectly it fits in there. I can put that soil back around it, tamp it in, and we're good to go. So I'm down to the last one. I want to show you, as I'm putting it in, how nice and easy this is. You can go with a different size auger depending on the size plant you're doing, but honestly, you can go slightly smaller and make the hole bigger by either doing a couple holes if you need to too. But for this one, it's working just perfect. So then I can just take my, this is mountain mint, but I'm just gonna take it and put it right in and then just put all that soil around it. So it really does work super easily, but it also saves work for me, which is really nice. You know, whenever you have a yard that is maybe bigger sometimes than your energy, which we all get there, you know, it's nice to find tools that really work well. So a power planter for me works really well. You have to just start using it, find out how it works for you, kind of start playing with it a little bit. And for me, it really is one of those things that for certain areas, I have found it really does help a lot. Obviously, I'll still be using it in the fall with bulbs, but with lots of plants here, what's nice is in established areas like this, you can go in without messing too much of it up. Same works for mulched areas. You can kind of have a smaller area. You're not having to displace huge amounts of soil over that mulch, just with one auger right in the center. So now that I've cleaned all this up, it's time to go on to some other tasks. So we're out in my gravel patio area right now where I keep, I'll say slightly maybe more specialty items. I have some of my citrus out here. I have my potted fig trees out here. I have some rosemary out here and some bay trees that are more topiary. So it's things I need to watch and look at. And you can see right here is a rosemary that is getting a little bit more disheveled. Now, this thing has been in here a couple years in the pot, and it started with a slight cone shape when I purchased it. And now I just like to keep that shape because I think it's fun. Now I use this rosemary, obviously, but I still like to keep the shape to it. You don't have to, and you know, depending where you live, rosemary can sometimes be a perennial all the way to an annual. For me, it's kind of a hardy annual in that it can take quite a bit of cold weather, but obviously not overwinter outside. So for me, I take it in the winter and I put it into my plant room. I keep it usually pretty cool in there. I don't actually keep this in the really hot side because it doesn't need it. It can go slightly dormant over the winter, really. And then I bring it back out and you can see it flushes out. You know, it has some yellowing on the inside just because it's starting to get so bushy. So it's a really good time to actually trim it. So I'm on a gravel patio. I could just trim it right there, but sometimes I like to try to catch all my trimmings. So I'll put it right here in a trough. Now, You can see this is not going to catch everything, but I'll be able to put some of it down there. So I'll kind of push it to one side, let it fall down, and then push it to the other. So I'm just going to eyeball this. You could put up a stake in the middle and even put a string down at different points if you want to try to keep a perfect shape. I live on a farm and this is just rosemary. We don't need to do that. But if you want to, you can. A good sharp shears though is important. So I like to just start making those cuts, and I just will start eyeballing where I want it. Now always go slightly shorter than you think at first, because we can always go longer in the end. I use the flower pot as a slight guide, but eventually it does get bigger than the flower pot. So you can see I'm just slowly going down. You know, it smells so good when you're doing this. What's nice about this, just like any other topiary, like if you had a juniper, arborvitae, anything that was topiaried, when you cut it, it starts opening up areas so more light can get in, and it will actually help it get a little bit more foliage and growth within those areas. So it is important to actually, if you want it to be topiaried, to trim it. If you don't ever have to trim your rosemary other than just using it. I'm doing this merely because I like the look of it, and it really does clean it up quite a bit. So you can see what I'm doing though is getting a lot of rosemary that I'm going to be able to use. So this rosemary is not going to get thrown out. All of this can be used in a lot of different ways in the kitchen. So not only can you dry it, which is to me really the first way. If you have extra herbs like rosemary and you don't know what to do with them, but you don't want to throw them out, all of this can just be dried. You can even just let it sit out if you want to at room temperature. Indoors, even if it's humid, it should dry out. You can also just put it in a really low oven or a dehydrator, as low as it can go in an oven. So usually more around the 110, 120 degree mark. And then once it's dried out, you can just between your hands crunch it up into small pieces, put it in jars and use it. And you can see really keeping a topiary is not as hard as it seems. You know, growing up, we would have never had rosemary. We just never did. We only had very select herbs if we had any. And now I find it so fun to be able to have all these, but also to keep them. And so this is just one of those things that to me, I love something that has an art to it, like a topiary. So to be able to keep it is just fun. So I'm gonna finish trimming it up, then we'll clean up. So if you look at the topiary behind me, it has it's just a nice clean shape now. It's somewhat shaped up, which I really like. Now you're also gonna see in here, let's look, lots of rosemary. So not gonna get thrown out. I think olive oil is one of my favorite ways to just infuse that olive oil with that slight rosemary essence. That's what I use on pork. I think it works so well with different pork marinades, or even drizzled on at the end. Even drizzled into a soup at the end, because rosemary works so well with heavy stews as we go into fall and winter. But then now what I want to do is go stake that tree I talked about. Staking trees, pretty easy, but it's also one of those things that we have to know how to do, because it can sometimes be one night where a tree starts to move and you don't want it to during a storm, and you're gonna need to stake it. So let's go talk about that. This tree is one of my favorite trees. I just planted it this year, and it's a weeping purple beech, as you can see. What I love about it is its wonky shape and nature. It's really unique. The one issue is, while it's a tall tree, it's probably at least 8 foot, and I just planted it this year. It was a balled and burlap tree, but the root ball was only, a couple feet. So we had a windstorm with some rain a couple weeks ago, and it laid it slightly over. So I know now that I need to stake it, and I knew I should anyway. I was just hoping I wouldn't have to. There's different ways to stake a tree, but I use posts. So these are usually old fence posts we have on the farm. You can use T-posts, U-posts, whatever you could find. You could even use a wood stake, but I find this higher the tree, like this one, I like something sturdy that I can really go into the soil with. Now these posts do have a nice piece that keeps them down in the soil. So I'm gonna pound these in, and then I'm going to brace it with some nice straps that protect the tree, and then to these stakes itself. So to me, this is just one of those things that anytime I plant a tree anymore, really big or small almost, I almost always will end up staking it, just because I live in a really open area where we do have a lot of wind. So what I'm gonna start by doing is just taking this stake, and I like to put them fairly close. I'm gonna say within 1 to 2, probably about 2 feet from the trunk. Now, if it's a bigger tree, it can go a little wider out, but you want it to be sturdy. So I put it about a couple feet from that trunk, and then I have a post pounder. Now, I will admit my post pounder is a homemade one. I think my dad and grandpa made years ago on the farm. If you buy them in the store, they have handles, which is nice. This one is a steel post that has some melted metal at the top to keep it. So it's loud, but you just pound it right into the ground. Now, I always check it when I'm done, and I can tell that that's sturdy and really solid. The one thing you want to think about is sometimes a tree will need 3 stakes. Sometimes 2 still allows it to move too much. This is in a semi-protected area in my backyard where it is protected from a lot of wind. It's just depending where that wind comes from. So 2 stakes back here should be enough. So I'm gonna go put the other one in, then we can start bracing it. Now that it's braced, I just want you to see what I'm gonna use. It's not braced yet. Now that the stakes are in, I just want you to see what I'm gonna use here. So these are nylon straps. This is what goes around the trunk of the tree. And the reason we're using this is you do not ever want to put just wire around a trunk of a tree. Wire like this would eat into the tree, would tear and rip it, and eventually the tree would grow into it too. It just is not what you want to do. Instead, you want something wide, but also soft. So this isn't going to mar the trunk or do anything. So what we do is we put this around the trunk and then put a piece of wire through these 2 holes that have grommets on them. And then we just pull that and brace it on each side. It really is super simple. And what's nice is, and you're gonna be able to see this here, I can go in and pick whatever point I think is gonna be best. Now, since this is a weeping tree, obviously it has a little bit of a different form than some others. Usually you don't have all the branching all the way up and down like I do to deal with, but I really like this tree, so I'm not gonna complain about that. But you can see you just have to go in, put the wire through. Now, some people will use string instead of wire. That's fine. I find for me, wire just works best, and I happen to have it. And the thing with like a twine is I find it usually wants to rip in the weather, in the wind, and this wire will last better for me. So you can see once I have that placed around the trunk, I'm just taking it right over to my post that we already put in, and then I just make sure it's semi-tight. Now, what you always want to make sure is that your tree is straight up and down, because you want to make sure your straps aren't going to train it in a wrong direction. Now, I'm only going to keep these on probably for a couple of years, maybe about 2 years, until I start noticing, or 3, that the roots are going to be good on their own. The only way to really know that is I usually go up and I will test the tree eventually to make sure it doesn't have too much give. I'm gonna put the other side on. The one thing I do always think I like to make sure is that the tree is not so pulled taut and tight that it could snap it. Certain trees, you want to make sure they just have a little bit of give, a little bit of movement within that bracing, just because in too much wind, if it's too tight, it could be a snapping point too. So those are all little things you can think about when you're staking, but it really does make a difference. That's all for today's tasks. You know, we're in the time of year where I'm starting to do maintenance things around the yard. I'm not really planting lots of new things other than that prairie stuff that really was just a maintenance because it's been sitting at my back door for too long. But I'm really just starting to kind of do some weeding, do all the things that we do throughout the summer just to keep the garden looking good, which honestly, this year we're really lucky with some rain that the garden is doing a lot of its work on its own, and that's how it should be. So I hope these tips, these tricks, maybe just watching me meander around and do mindless things sometimes can be inspiring, but also help you see that gardening can be done any shape or size. Whether on my farm here in Iowa or at your house, it should work. So as always, share this video around. Check my website, wiseguy.com, for recipes and for more. Until next time, happy gardening.